Eloise Remy Tax in the Gawak was it Najulate, Nidlage. Lida Hasmali was Gidaham Cosit, Gal was it PGM. Gil Bemikchit was in Napid Weeko, Gajit was it Nijan Zazos. The Maui Mali was Salgal was it. Yemia win Nilo and Lock mixed away no to get. I probably could have been here. So I just recited the Hail Mary in my language and the way the cross that we begin and then we end as well in my language. And this was taught to me by my aunt, who gave me the copy of being able to say the Our Father, Hail Mary, Glory be, the mysteries of the decades. And so she recorded that for me, and I learned in probably 1991, 1992. So that's, and I think, just to explain a little bit of the Hail Mary, the reason why I chose the Hail Mary, we say, okay, Hail Mary, full of grace in English, right? So I say, Walita Hus Mali. Walita Hus is always something good. You know, I'm happy. Walita Hus Mali. Mary, thank you for making me great. So I'll be thinking better. Wizgidaham Kusit means the one who is thought of to be the greatest of women. That's how the Hail Mary, we'll say Hail Mary full of grace. The expression full of grace in my language is a different concept in a way. So it's when we say Lida Hasmal, Wizgidaham Kusit, in other words, it's the one that is the greatest of women. So as you go on to that Hail Mary, you'll see then that it is very significant in my language, and I'm glad my aunt taught me those words. So there's a more fervent and intimate connection with the Blessed Mother, and also with her son Jesus. So anyway, just give that a little bit of I guess a bit of background on that.
Good, thank you very much.
Yeah. So, but sorry, go ahead, Owen.
Yeah, no, there's no coincidence that we're meeting today. This was definitely intentional. Today, June 21st, our entire country celebrates Indigenous Peoples Day. Before we get into the actual celebration of today, for those who are watching this, I'm wondering if you'd like to share a bit about yourself, where you come from, some of those major accomplishments that you probably are very well known for, but those who are watching might not know.
Okay, well, of course, you know, I was born in January 20th, 21st, 1946. And when my mother was pregnant with me, she fell into an ice crossing the Tobic River, which meets the St. John River. So there were currents in both those rivers. And there was what they call an air pocket. So she fell in and was rescued, thank goodness. And 2 weeks later, I was born. So I was born at 7 months, actually, in her womb, as opposed to 9 months. So when I was born, of course, back then there wasn't much in terms of medical systems that we'd have now for natal care. And so I was pretty well just skin and bones, pretty given up for dead. And he'll go soon. Well, my mother said, there's no way I'm going to give him up. Because I could not retain milk. I could not retain it. Just I suppose my system wasn't fully developed yet. So as a result, I was even worse off, I guess. So a lot of people told my mother, look, it isn't meant to be. Just let him go. Let God take him. So my mother says, no, I won't. I don't want to. Anyway, so she started praying to the Blessed Mother. And I mean, I wouldn't have known this at the time, and then she got a hold of a new doctor in the area. And my mother rushed me down there, and kind of talked to a delivery guy on the reserve, said, look, you got to take me downtown. I got to see the doctor. I want to save my baby. So the guy said, okay. So she took me to the doctor. Doctor examined me and all that. And he said, the only thing I can think of is he needs to retain fluid. The only way he can retain fluid is some kind of a salt content. He said, why don't you take the broth of beef barley soup mix it in with the milk, back then incarnation, whatever they call it, and sure enough, that mixture of salt with the other helped me to start to retain fluid. So, so I mean, when you start, it's a miracle that I'm even alive. So, so my mother never told me this story. It was my aunt that told me. I couldn't believe it. And so that's how I came into this world. Born on the Tubig First Nation. The Sisters of Charity had a health clinic there, thank goodness. And so I wouldn't even know how long I was in the hospital. Who knows? I don't know. But eventually, so that's how that it. And I come from a large family. My mom and dad had 12 children. Two infant girls did die shortly after birth, and so there were 10 of us. And so, and you look at me now with all these credentials I've got, but when I started school in grade 1, I only knew my language. And so at the end of the year, I actually failed grade 1 because I couldn't read. I mean, I knew words, but I just could not read them in even small little books. So as a result, I didn't pass. So, and I mean, I started school when I was, 5 years old? Because when you're born in January, we started school in the fall of, when I was only 5 years old, 1951. So, but, it was a tough summer. I said this at my installation as Lieutenant Governor. I said, when your name is Graydon, everybody asks you, "Grade, did you grade?" The answer obviously is no. So actually, I was ridiculed quite a bit for, I guess, failing grade 1. And as a child, you're saying, well, why would they be making fun of me? How come? Why? But anyway, I won't go into more detail than that. It happened, and as anyone is like that, you bury it inside. But I'll send you a copy of my healing journey when I explain this a little bit more. But I've always, and he was my cousin in grade. He passed me actually. We were started grade 1 together, and he passed. And so we were in the same classroom in grade 1 the following year. He was in grade 2, I was in grade 1, and he said, "I'll teach you how to read." Because you're still busy, got 3 grades, right? And so he's the one who taught me how to read. And so I've always been grateful of him for that. I mean, how many other students at grade 1 would help somebody else? So that's why I've always emphasized the importance of education, sharing knowledge, and see what good comes out of that. So that's my background. And these other things, okay, I went to university in Antigonish 4 years, and that's where I met my wife, which is that's probably the best memory of all my university. My wife's from St. John Beth, and we met there in the fall of 1967. And we got married in 1969 after my first year of law school at UNB. And then we moved to Ontario to do a master's degree in social work, and I finished in 74. And by then we had 2 kids, and you have to make a living, you have to feed your family and children. But we came back to New Brunswick, and I got involved in Indigenous politics. I was a full-time lawyer with the organization, and I defended our people in provincial courts, family court, and other higher courts dealing with Indigenous rights. And and I was involved politically at the national level, international level. I was very fortunate to be in Geneva, Switzerland in the summer of 83, 84, 87, and 88. And that was the genesis of the United Nations Declarations on Indigenous Peoples. That's why I'm such a strong proponent for that particular document, because of what it contains. So after I finished all that as a politician, I went to St. Thomas and began to teach there full time. I was teaching part time at St. Thomas on the Indigenous law since 1983, actually. And I'm back there now. Like I was a provincial court judge for 19.5 years. Then you get that call, how would you like to be Lieutenant Governor? At 5 years, and then I said, oh boy, I'm going to retire. That lasted about 9 months, and then I'm back at the university in 2015. So, and I've been there since. So that's the summary. That's the best summary I can give.
All right, thank you for that. So as I mentioned earlier, that today is National Indigenous Peoples Day. And we chatted a little bit before the call, but I plead ignorance in the sense that it seems to be highlighted a lot this year, and I'm kind of discovering it. But doing my research on the federal government's website, I discovered that this actually was formalized in 1996. Dialogue was happening in 95 to actually set this date. Do you want to share a little bit about the development of today and why it's important?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, in 1995, there was a gathering in well, back then in Ottawa, it was called Sacred Assembly, and Bishop Troy actually sent me there. I was already sitting judge, so I think it might be late November when he had confirmation at St. Dunstan's. He said, "I'd like to see you after Mass." I said, "Oh, did I do something wrong?" So, and after Mass, I said, "Oh, what is it? What is Bishop Troy you'd like talk to me about?" He says, "Well, look, they're holding a sacred assembly in Ottawa, and I want you to represent our diocese there." I said, "When is it?" He said, these are the dates. And so I said, well, I'll see if I can clear my court schedule, if I can be there. I mean, it was sort of like on the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I'll fly there. And so sure enough, it just, I was able to free my day. And I was able to get a good seat sale to go to Ottawa. And so it was amazing for me. And the Sacred Assembly was a gathering of Indigenous elders across this land. It was different church leaders, all different Christian faiths and non-Christian faiths, because because you brought in rabbis as well, and then you brought in bishops, different bishops from across the country, and then you brought in the political people as well. So also our Indigenous youth were involved in that at the time, and then our Indigenous leaders, along with, I believe at the time the Prime Minister was John Patrick, I think. But it was put together by Elijah Harper, who was quite a man from Manitoba, actually, and then he had been part of the Liberal Party, and he got elected. So he's the one who put all this together. So I got sent there, and it was amazing. So it was out of that particular process. Then they said, well, why don't we celebrate a day in Canada honoring Aboriginal people? So that's why it was called National Aboriginal Day later on. But there had been other people who had made recommendations. But I think it was that Sacred Assembly gathering of all these different important people across our land. Then it became a reality. And it continued to be that way until Prime Minister Trudeau changed it in June of 2017. And instead, we were going to call this now National Indigenous Peoples Day.
So is there any significance to June 21st being the day that's selected?
Why do you pick that day? Well, it's an important day for our people in terms of a summer solstice, and it's also the longest daylight of the year, calendar year. So it was to honor then the celebrations that would take place even before Indigenous contact with Europeans. You know, because solstices are important for us. It signaled a different cycle of life. It also signaled different cycle of Mother.
So I agree with you privately that I feel that the public education system has kind of failed me as a citizen of New Brunswick, but I also take responsibility for that myself because I'm an adult now and I have choice. For education around Indigenous peoples, it doesn't seem to be that evident in school, or at least it wasn't, 20, 30 years ago when I was in school. How would you recommend that, the general population educate themselves on Indigenous people, resources or even some websites that we could visit to gain better knowledge?
Well, I think first of all, I think the curriculum that's taught in our schools are controlled by the province, right? And in order, any teacher, you can develop, try to tailor your particular course if you want to bring it. And there are certain areas in our province which do have Indigenous input, but it's usually where there's a concentration of Indigenous students, like I'm thinking of Campbellton, which a lot of the children there from Listigoch come over there. I'm thinking of, for example, some schools in the Miramichi actually, and also in what they would call Bonner Law in Rexton. 58% of the student population is Mi'kmaq. And then you've got some programs here in Fredericton or Muktu, because what you have in the Fredericton region is you have Kingsclear First Nation village, Zidon-Sis, which is St. Mary's, and they send their children to the high school, either Leo Hayes or Fredericton High School. And then Muktu has quite a vibrant group. And then up in our Woodstock has some. Our community up in Tobic First Nation, we have schools in our community, but they also have public schools downtown. So they're trying to get more Indigenous input into the curriculum. The difficulty is it's not compulsory courses, and so it's an optional. So, if you want to apply to universities or whatever, you want to make sure your marks are good and in these particular areas that universities will teach. So that's part of the learning process that's still there. There is a very strong curriculum committee now that's taken place in our province. And what I can do is I can send you the information about the Department of Education, because they're employing people and they're including our elders in this particular process. So that's kind of the background of it. And you're right. When I teach at university, I always ask them, well, where are you from in the province? Or if it's not a province, where you're from? That gives me an idea then of how I would introduce a course, depending on what the students would know.
So one thing that I've experienced growing up, but also as a priest, various rituals or spiritual practices merging or being interwoven between Indigenous communities and their parish. So two things that I've actually witnessed is drumming during or before a mass, and also smudging, which are not extremely different than our own practices. So we do use incense, and I'm wondering if there's any link between the smudging and the incense, or why those would be included, and how we can actually develop more links with Indigenous practices.
Well, I think that's true. We burn incense and normally it's very special occasions on a mass or a funeral, right? Because people are more used to that. And the priest goes on, doesn't really explain the reason why the incense is part of our liturgical practice, right? Not practice, religious faith. But smudging is interesting, because smudging is offering prayers to the Creator. So that's why they'll smudge in 7 directions. In other words, the directional ones, cardinal directions, which we're more used to, north, south, east, and west. But it's also the individual within themselves, and then toward the you'll see some smudging that goes toward the ground, which represents Mother Earth. And then the other one, of course, is smudging above, so that the prayers are all offered to the Creator. And in each particular direction of these 7 directions has a particular purpose in our particular spiritual values. And so usually that could be put on the website to explain in which direction, why this is done. Now, so that is done. And if you have participated in a funeral ceremony for Indigenous people, you'll see that smudging is very, very crucial. That's part of it. Even at the very beginning, they can do that to bring even a more sacred space to what's happening there. And the the drum is what we call the heartbeat of Mother Earth. And so again, it's a lot of people can sing, chant. I got my own chant, I guess, but I have my own drum. And you've probably seen me at the time of the Eucharistic celebration, like when the consecration is taking place, I've been invited to play my drum at that time. And that's to offer these sacred prayers, this very sacred part of our Mass, to our Creator. So the sound of the drum then signals, okay, this is something very spiritual, and that this is, personally, I think it should be done at every Mass, especially where you have Indigenous people in your parish. The Our Father now, we're saying, okay, we should say that in our language at that time, followed by English, or I suppose I'll say the same thing. Just so people will say the words in our language, the prayers that we have, the Our Father, Hail and Mary, glory be. Those words are also significant for us, but it has a more depth of the meaning. So this is what we share. So this is what enculturation is all about. See? So that's I'm really grateful that the bishops, Bishop Harris was very good with that when we celebrated that special mass here at St. Dunstan's, and he asked me to be part of that. Actually, a number of us to be there in our particular diocese, and then at the when Bishop Reisbach was you can't say reinstalled because he was already a bishop, but when he came to St. John, then again we were invited to be there, and we invited the drum group actually from Willamuktuk or Muktuk, and that was a fantastic and spiritual experience for these young kids. They couldn't believe they would be accepted, and you heard the drumming, the chanting, and then of course in the prayers, offertory prayers, I guess, or petitions, we were both invited to say a prayer intention in my language and also in Mi'kmaq, which again is significant for our people, because then you see it's a recognition of how we're part of our Catholic faith, and that our Catholic faith includes our spiritual ceremonies, our spiritual prayers, and also our spiritual languages.
It's great. Now, actually, and like the one thing I noticed is the drum, and it's played very softly. But if you've ever experienced the larger drums, those young people who were drumming for Bishop Reisbach's installation, when you speak about that heartbeat, you can actually feel it in your chest. It's a powerful sound. So I definitely understand the practice of the heartbeat being present. You spoke about enculturation, and one thing that I think is very beautiful, especially opening up with the Hail Mary, is that it isn't an opposing view. There's many shared spiritual practices and beliefs. Can you speak a bit more about the overlap or how they play with one another?
Well, I think I guess the term enculturation was very much the papacy of Pope John Paul II. And when you, I mean, there's a lot of this. I could talk a lot about the research I was involved in back in 1969 on the arrival of the Spanish and the Portuguese in that area of the Americas, and how brutal everything was. But what was significant of that period, Father One, is there were voices of the voiceless. There's a Dominican priest who was Father Montesinos, Fray Montesinos, who as early as 1511 condemned what the Spanish were doing to those people, indigenous people in that area. They made them into slaves. They were literally working with them. And so he, in fact, challenged the military who were present in the church, sort of like the third Sunday of Advent, and tell them what you're doing here is wrong. You are misrepresenting the teachings of Jesus. So that's 1511, and that's only what, 9 years after 1492? I mean, 21 years, I guess. But shortly thereafter, you've got a strong Dominican, a follower of Jesus, defending the indigenous people. Present at that particular mass was another one, Bartholomew de las Casas. And Las Casas was sent there by his father to take advantage of the mercantile possibilities of trade and the wealth of this new world to come to Spain. That particular mass, Las Casas, changed, and later on became a Dominican. And he was a very strong advocate of the rights of indigenous people because he saw them. But he also saw them that they were prepared to accept Jesus. Because Jesus is and was and is, I should say, a man of peace. And so he later on actually became a bishop. And then he approached theologian Francesco de Vittoria, who was teaching at the University of Salamanca in Spain. See, because you see, Francesco de Vittoria had been asked by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella, how do we relate to these indigenous people? They don't even believe in our God. They don't believe it. They have different ways of living. Are they human or what? So these debates took place. But Francesco de Vittoria, being a professor of theology, used the Old Testament to say that indigenous people are persons, even if they don't believe in the same God that the Jewish people believe. And they also have rights to land. So his advice to the King of Spain was, okay, you have to treat them as persons because they are persons, but you also have to respect their land rights. Well, that's not what the King of Spain wanted to hear, right? Because he wanted to say, I discovered this land, this is mine, before the French or any other European country. So he did not allow that kind of advice to go to the New World. But Vittoria, thank the Lord and thank goodness, ventured to Rome a number of times. And in 1537, convinced the Pope of the day, Pope Paul III, to issue a church edict called Sublimis Deus, in which the Pope of the day, Paul III, said that indigenous people are persons and they have land rights. And anyone who tries to deny them these two, it's null and void. In other words, it's no good. So when I saw that document, I mean, wow, I was overwhelmed. I mean, that's after my first year of law. And then after that, I've been a strong proponent. How come this is not taught in our Catholic faith? How come? Anyway, so I've had these questions a long, long time. And so when Pope John Paul II came to Canada, he said, well, three very important things. Number one, he acknowledged that St. Anne de Beaupré at the gathering that the grandmother, St. Anne, is also grandmother to us as Indigenous people, and the importance of grandmothers, what I speak about. Secondly thing is when he went to the shrine in Medellin, which is where the Jesuits were originally, and dealing with the Hurons, Pope John Paul II agreed to be publicly smudged. And in the homily that he gave, he said, Christ in his own body is Indian. Wow. When I heard that, I said, jump back to 1969 when I was involved in this research. And so many years later, this is coming about. And then the third thing that he did, he couldn't land at Fort Simpson in Northwest Territories to speak to the Indigenous gathering there. So he had to give his speech from the airport in Yellowknife. And in that speech he gave at Yellowknife, he said, I am here to confirm what my predecessor, Paul III, said in 1537. Wow, I said, this is incredible. Wow. So you see, in his trip in 1984, these three things were revealed to our Catholic community. So the question is, what has happened since 1984 in the Catholic Church in Canada? How many bishops, how many cardinals, how many priests, how many those involved in church life know that this is important? And so I always talk about these, and now it all this is happening for a reason. And if you can, in a way, say, okay, to our diocese, we're not reinventing the wheel here. It's always been there. Let's just go back to 1610. when the first baptism took place. It just is not being taught anywhere. Other than you meet somebody like me who'll talk about this stuff, but 1600s is important because that's also the year when St. Catherine Tekakwitha lived. And she was only Catholic 4 years until she died at a young age. And it's also the year when another one I hope will become a saint someday, Joseph Chihuahua, who was with the Hurons in Midland. He was the first Indigenous person to do the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. So we've got all that beautiful fermenting of enculturation. And 400 years later, maybe we could revisit this a little bit and say, how do we catch up on all this, and so that we don't think of it as a threat. We had voices who were Catholic voices back in 1500s. Now, their voices may have been stored away in some remote box of knowledge or something like that. But what they said was right. It's important that our Catholic community, not only in our diocese, but throughout Canada, know that this is very important, very likely.
So today we celebrate National Indigenous Peoples Day, and I think the risk with celebrating any national day is that we isolate it to one specific day. You have 24 hours. We'll speak about this. We'll move on to something else. Canada Day is coming up. We'll focus on that for 24 hours. How can we move past just one day, move past just one Zoom call to actually celebrate our history, our culture, the other 364 days of the year?
Well, I think there are important events within our diocese. 4 years ago, Bishop Harris was invited to celebrate the 300th year anniversary of the Mass that was celebrated up in Meduck. And he was there, and I was there, and there were quite a few of us gathered because this is where the missionaries celebrated Mass for our people. And so there are other key areas. One of the very first Masses that were held along the St. John River is an island, just not far from Queenstown, I guess. So we call it Caton's Island. And it's on the St. John River. Now, it used to be the Holy Fathers who had that, but it's turned over now to the Wesleyan Church. But we had a special Mass there as well. The head of the Jesuit order came down, and I remember Father Monty Peters was there, and I'm not sure if Monsignor Hannaberry would have been there, but we had a special Mass that was said in celebration of the very first Mass that was held on that St. John River. And so those are, again, that's part of our history as our diocese. There are other ones in the different dioceses in our province, because we have more than one diocese. But any opportunity to celebrate, like, for example, June 24th is coming up, right? Jean Baptiste Day. But don't forget, June 24th was also the day of the baptism of Grand Chief Member Two. And the other thing is, we have St. Anne's Day, which is coming up on July 26th. You already talked about the Orange Shirt Day in September 30th. And it's also going to be made a national holiday in remembrance of residential school survivors. The government just passed that law. And then we have October 3rd, which is Treaty Day for the Mi'kmaq, treaty that was signed in 1752. The whole month of October is called the Red Dress Campaign in commemoration of murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so there are all these different, and then you've got November the 8th, which is National Indigenous Veterans Day. And there's a reason why that was set aside, because the Indigenous veterans were not welcomed in Ottawa on November 11th. Very sad. But then we created our days. And then, of course, we've got the National Day of Prayer and Solidarity with Indigenous Peoples, December the 12th, Feast Day of Our Lady Guadalupe, which is, again, something that our diocese participates in. But there are all of these other dates that are happening throughout the year. We have at St. Thomas University what we call a calendar of events, which because you also have the solstice on December, another one in December 21st, right? And then there's one also on March 21st. So we've got these solstices because of the change of the seasons. And so celebrations take place on that as well for different spiritual reasons. So that's there. Believe me, there are a lot of days in our calendar, liturgical calendar, which are significant. Of course, we celebrate the feast day of Saint Caterina Cahuita, right? And that's usually April 13th in our calendar. In the United States, it's a different day, but she was born in New York State and died in Canada, so we celebrate too. So she's one of the very few saints, other than the Blessed Mother and Saint Joseph, who have a lot of dates. But among laity, I guess if I could say that, she has. And there would be another one I'd like to bring to the attention of our diocese because of residential schools. There was a young woman, her name was Rose Prince, who went to a residential school up in the Diocese of Prince George. And they have a Rose Prince pilgrimage, which takes place in I think it was in July. I was invited to be there by Bishop. And so I went, and I call it the miraculous thing about Rose Prince was when she went to residential school, she was a member of the Carrier tribe in that area of British Columbia. And for her, it was a good experience for residential school. And she didn't want to leave when she had to leave. So she asked her parents, can I stay here? So she did. And she didn't live that long, but she died. And they buried her. Well, when they had to have new cemetery remove the remains from one to the other, when they came to her gravesite and they removed the coffin opened up. And you know, the amazing thing, her body had not corrupted. So they saw her. And so, wow, I mean, to me, that's a miracle. And so they are in fact trying to see if there would be a way towards sainthood for her. And so she gathers all Indigenous people, and she's seen as, in fact, the person who could lead us toward reconciliation and what happened at the residential school. But that's in the making. But I experienced that. Believe me, it was a really quite a spiritual experience I had up there. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that because I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know this. So
That's
the more we know, the better.
Yeah. So I know today is a work day for most people. It's Monday morning. But are you able to celebrate anyway today, especially with COVID restrictions? Is it virtual? Are there any in-person celebrations? How will you be marking today?
Well, originally I was supposed to be in our community, but because of circumstances, I can't be there. Now it just so happens I have to be on a Zoom call with the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops, Our Lady of Guadalupe Circle. We have a subcommittee, so I'm on that. We're meeting on Zoom at 2 o'clock till 4. And then tonight, our prayer group, River of Life, is meeting by Zoom starting 5 o'clock till 8 o'clock. So, but throughout, I've prayed already, and shortly my wife and I'll go for a walk and before the next Zoom thing. And we'll go visit my son's grave. My son died in 2019, as you know. He was only 49 years old. But he returned to our faith. Because a lot of parents, once the kids leave the nest, I guess, they're on their own. You tell them, okay, let's go to Mass. But so you say, okay, Christmas and Easter Catholics is what a lot of them turn out to be until they become parents. And then they'll say, well, okay, maybe we should get our children baptized in the Catholic faith. But my oldest son never married. But while he was diagnosed in June of 2016 with terminal illness, and then he was given 18 months to live. He lived beyond that. So by giving him prayer material, he came back faithfully to our church. And he, so my wife and I would go to masses often as we can daily. And then at one time he said, "Dad, can I come with you?" Wow, you talk about the Lord. I said, "Yes, definitely you can." And so after that, he was so faithful to our faith. So we do that in honor of him, to visit him as much as we can in spirit. And so we'll be doing that today, saying our prayers. So.
All right. Well, great to thank you from your duties today. But I do want to thank you for joining us and enlightening me and anyone who watches the video on today's celebration of the National Indigenous Peoples Day. And hopefully going forward, I myself can gain more education in the area, so it isn't just a one-day thing. So again, on behalf of the Diocese of St. John, I'd like to thank you for giving up your time and your extensive knowledge.
Well, good thing I survived that thing back in 1946, right?
Praise the Lord.
So I guess that Blessed Mother continues to watch over me. So anyway, thank you very much, both of you. I appreciate the interest and keep up your good work.
Thank you. God bless.
Okay.